So our final speaker this evening before we go into our panel session with all the speakers is Cookbee Wayne Christian. Wayne Christian is of Shuswap ancestry and is the Cookbee chief of Splatsin First Nation. He was first elected as chief in 1979 and served for 8 years, then was re-elected in 2005. His current term marks his 5th consecutive term as chief. Leadership for Cookbee Christian is a way of living, a way of achieving change, and a way to strengthen our nations and next generations. He has more than 30 years in leadership from being a national spokesperson for the Shuswap Nation at the National Confederacy of Chiefs, executive director for Round Lake Treatment Center, and chairperson of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Resolutions Committee. In 2013, he was awarded an honorary doctorate of laws from Thompson Rivers University. Cookbee Christian has accomplished a lot in his leadership career, most notably was being chairperson for the Constitutional Express, a key political force of 100 leaders, elders, and spiritual people leading delegations to the Canadian Parliament to enforce the rights for self-government. Also being the former chief for Shuswap Nation Tribal Council, which represents 9 of the 17 Secwepemc communities. Cookbee Christian is currently the chairperson for the Secwepemc Health Caucus, which consists of 17 chiefs and 13 health directors to create a community-driven, nation-based health system for Secwepemc people. Please help me in welcoming Chief Christian to the stage.
Well, Waitko Hoitap, and Squast Wanokchin, and Jawa Cookbee Spelatina. My Indian name is Wanokchin. It comes from my great-great-grandfather. It means a big voice that speaks the truth. And I'm the chief of Splatsin, Secwepemc, the southernmost community in the Shuswap Nation. I first want to acknowledge Cookbee Shane and his people here, and it's all the Cookbees that are here, the chiefs in the Tkemlups, and Chief Joe and Chief Bernie. I know what we're talking about is the what happened in June 26th, was it? Yeah, the day after Custer got slaughtered. Perfect day. Got to know your history. Anyways, I just want to acknowledge all the elders, all the public that is here. I just want to, I've got a slide presentation I'll go through, and so I'll just move through it. This is, when we talk about Secwepemc, this is what it is. This is our traditional territory. We've been living here since time immemorial. And you'll note that there are communities on this map that are red, are considered extinct by Indian Affairs. But those communities are not extinct. They live within the blood of our people and the existing communities. It's because of the smallpox epidemic that our communities were reduced to where we're. And I think it's really important. This territory, our people have defended it for thousands of years. We've made treaties and we've entered into agreements with other nations around us. In 1910, Sir Wilfrid Laurier was the Prime Minister of Canada, and he came here in August 25th of 1910, and the Chiefs of the Interior presented a memorial to him. And it was really not only the Secwepemc, it was the Tsilhqot'in, the Okanagan, the other nations in the interior presented this memorial to Sir Wilfrid Laurier. And what is really important, and this is one of when we talk of Aboriginal title, you can see at the very bottom it talks about thus fire, water, food, clothing, and all necessities of life are obtained in abundance from the lands of our tribe. All the people had equal rights of access to everything they required. You will see the ranch of each tribe was the same as its life, and without it, people could not have lived. So when our people speak of Aboriginal title, what it is, it's our life. You can't extinguish our life. You can't take our life away from us. And so when the Tsilhqot'in and their elders did what they did based on their oral history for thousands of years, they brought that back to life in the current common law and the Supreme Court process. And it's really important. This is what our elder leaders were saying in the 1910. And this is what I was talking about, these dates in history. And these are significant to the Secwepemc Nation as a whole. The Royal Proclamation of 1763. It is again how Canada acquired land right across Canada in terms of the number of treaties. And I think it's really important to understand that the Royal Proclamation really was sort of the nation-to-nation agreement between Canada, the British Crown, and the Indian nations, and that's how they acquired. That's all the numbered treaties right across Canada. a lot of people don't talk about is the Treaty of Niagara a year later in 1764. Those of you that are historians will know that there was an event that took place in Niagara Falls where over 2,000 Indian leaders from across Canada gathered to talk about how to implement this treaty, the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And that whole concept then arose about the two-row wampum belt and the coexistence. You hear about that back east. And this piece of legislation, if you will, this treaty is in our oral history. Our people have been talking about the gathering of those leaders, the 2,000 leaders, and it's in our oral history. When our old people talk about this, they talk about that as one of the implements and how it was implemented in terms of the Royal Proclamation. And you can see the next couple of ones, there's a white arrow of treaty with the Okanogans. It actually happened right out here in the river, and talked about how we actually exchanged that arrow so we would end war amongst ourselves. And there's a whole oral history behind that. But also there's the Fish Lake Accord we had with the Okanogans. So the Okanagan people to us are very close in blood. We're actually one people. And I think it's really important. We were putting these kinds of agreements that still exist today after hundreds of years. These are treaties that exist with our neighbors, and it's really important. In 1846, this is what gets me, is it was the assertion of Crown sovereignty, is when they, what I think it was the, I forget what treaty, what's the name of the one down south? What's that treaty of when they made the border? Yeah, the Oregon Boundary Treaty, that's 1846, is how they came up with the assertion of Crown sovereignty. And what a lot of people don't know, you know, again, that's the assertion that the Crown took over land, and there's a whole doctrine of discovery. And in the Williams case, it talked about the doctrine of terra nullius. And if you don't know what that means, it means the land was, that was a doctrine they used to take up all our land. And in the actual Supreme Court, they actually say that no longer exists because of the Royal Proclamation, et cetera, et cetera. But they did not sort of say the doctrine of discovery did not exist, because the doctrine of discovery simply is an instrument that was used worldwide to take up Indian lands, not only here in North America, but also South America and all, you know, New Zealand, Australia, all those places where they came along and they planted a flag and said that it is ours. And so I think that's really important. That doctrine of it has to be renounced, because it's the instrument that is using and driving sort of the colonial process. The Canadian Wars, how many of you heard of the Canadian Wars in 1858? Some of you have, it's good. Very significant, because this is when the time when the American militia, and they're pushing up and looking at sort of gold, what's going on now in terms of mining, they're pushing up the Fraser Valley. And the Canadian War was when they actually went into a process where the Tsilhqot'in, ourselves, and the Okanagan gathered, and there was a war against the American militia. And at the same time that we were asserting and entered into, they're called the Snyder Treaties, there's 6 or 7 of them actually, where we entered into agreements with the United States that they would end that war. And it was really important, because that's, if you have to understand that British Columbia was asserting sovereignty at this time, but Douglas never came to the mainland till later. So it really was a situation where we as a sovereign people were asserting our rights to protect our boundaries, to assist our neighbors in war, and it was really important. In 1895, our people have a hunting treaty with the Stoney people over in Invermere with the Shuswap band and the Tanaka. And actually, we're going to revive that treaty and bring it back to life and reaffirm it. Because again, like shows that on our borders, we entered into treaties with those people around us. And then most recently in the Delgamuukw decision in 1997, the chiefs came down, the hereditary chiefs, and entered into a peace and cooperation treaty with the Tsilhqot'in Nation. It's actually on a plaque, and it sits in the Shuswap Nation Tribal Council office. And we're actually going to probably call upon the Gitxsan to come forward, and we're going to enact that treaty and get to work with the Gitxsan in terms of the title question. I think it's really important. So the significance of these dates really shows that we as a nation of people were entering into agreements and protecting our lands and our boundaries, and entering those things are really important. The Jules, it's called the Jules Harper and Jules Wilson. The Jules Harper is the Secwepemc side, and the Browns Creek Wilson is the Okanagan side of the case. And it was filed on October 13th, 1999. And what we were doing, and I wasn't involved at the time, but what we were doing is the chiefs were talking about what our old people have always told us, is that why do we have to prove that the land is ours? We want to see them show us our papers, show the papers to us of how they got our land. That's what people have always told us since I was little, many, many years ago to now, is that we issued our own cutting permits. And we did that kind of a process, asserting our jurisdiction over the land. And so it's really important that we understand that this case is before the courts right now, and it's sort of the next sort of wave, if you will, of title cases that's going to happen in British Columbia. At the same time, the Tsilhqot'in Nation filed a writ in 2003, a protective writ. I think all the nations across British Columbia did this at the same time. So it's an important rules case that really what we're looking at, and the chiefs that are involved in that are Chief Nelson Leon, I saw him here earlier, Chief Judy Wilson, and our community, and with Chief Byron Lewis of the Okanagan Indian Band. You know, on June 26th, like I said, it was a tremendous day, and again, I honor the Tsilhqot'in, and especially the old ones for what they did. I think the strength of really, it showed to us really clearly that BC could show their papers of how they got the land. They couldn't do that. They couldn't prove in a court of law, their own court of law, that they had papers and how they got that land. So I think it's really, really important. So what we really see this in terms of the Tsilhqot'in decision, it's no longer about consultation, accommodation. It's about consent and fiscal relationships with the Crown. And the interesting thing in the Tsilhqot'in case, it really is clear that we're no longer dealing with two crowns, we're dealing with one crown. And that crown represents both Canada and British Columbia. So it sort of narrows that field side, is that when the crown is sitting with us, not only are the BC sitting there, they're also representing Canada. And that's what's really important in this process. And what's most important, again, we go back to 1910 and what our chiefs were talking about, our ancestral chiefs were talking about that middle sentence. We want an equal chance of earning a living, making a living off our land. And that's what it is today in 2014, 2015. We still want that equal chance of earning a living off our land. And I think that's really what this is about. We talk about sustainability, we talk about environmental planning, we talk about those kinds of things. It really is about how can we earn a living off our land, because that land has helped our people survive for thousands of years. You know, and people ask, what is an Aboriginal right? And when you see people that are making buckskin and living off the land, that's their Aboriginal right. They're asserting their right to the land. When people are out hunting and picking berries and doing those things, picking medicine, they're asserting their right to that land, and we've been doing that for thousands of years. But we have to be able to translate that into the world in terms of how do we actually make a living off the land. And I think that's what's really important. And I think this is really critical. You know, I heard Chief Mike talk about it, is really what this is about for us now, is that every cubic meter of logs that come off our territory, the 180,000 square kilometers, every rock, every stone, every drop of water, every blade of grass, everything where it generates an income, what we're saying, our ancestors said, we want 50% of everything that comes off that land because it is ours. And that's no longer about accommodation. What we're talking about is a fiscal relationship with government. We no longer want a process where they're going to give us handouts and one-off agreements. We want a fiscal relationship with British Columbia and Canada in order for us to no longer be putting our hands out. You know, we're not looking for handouts. Our people have never looked for handouts. We just want the ability to earn a living off our land in a sustainable way for the future of our nation. It's really important. This is one instance out of 1910. We talk about supreme authority, and I think this is really where I think British Columbia has a difficult time. They do not want to relinquish any jurisdiction or authority over the lands that are ours. And I think we've got to make them understand that we have supreme authority. We've not sold, ceded, nor surrendered our lands. And with that is that we have our own laws and our own processes in terms of looking after the land. Because if you read the memorial, it talks about it in this way, that these lands, this 180,000 kilometers was looked at as a ranch or a house, and it was managed in that way. It was managed, the territory was managed in terms of how we harvested off for certain parts of the territory, off to the watersheds, off those animals, and that's really an important concept to understand. So we have supreme authority. We have not sold, surrendered, nor will we ever cede or surrender our lands, and it's really important to understand that. This is a concept about the concept of sharing 50-50. And it puzzled me, and I think about this in terms of our leaders in 1910, when they presented this and talked about we wanted to share in everything 50-50 with our brothers, because they saw the settlers that came in as relation. In our word is called Tsilhqot'in, and it's one of the highest things we have is our Tsilhqot'in and how we have that kinship ties. And so we really talk about in the concept, we want to stand each other up to be great and good. And I guess it's to now, I think what the Tsilhqot'in decision really shows to us, it's time now to do that. And it's really important that the public and those of you that are out there that are really looking at this to understand you have to force your government into really to sit down with us and really enter into agreements where we can actually build this country and build British Columbia back to what it can be. Because I think we have to understand that we're at a really sort of a dangerous situation in British Columbia. There's so much resource extraction going on. You have to understand the lifetimes of these mines are 20 to 25 years, but they leave behind them a lifetime of ruin. We have to start thinking that concept and talk about resource extraction. What are we actually going to do together to do something about the land for the future generations? I should be just about finished, right? Shaking head. This is really interesting. This comes out of paragraph 36 of the Tsilhqot'in decision. It talks about the concept at common law perspective in terms of the import, possession, and control of lands. At common law extends beyond the sites that are physically occupied, like a house, to surround the lands that are used over which effective control is exercised. I found that very interesting, that concept is like a house, because that's what our chief said in 1910. The land is like a house. And what we do within that house is how we protect it and how we look after it. So now they moved away, the courts have moved away from that concept of small spots to looking at the land as a whole. Because I think that's what this really speaks to with our ancestors in 1910. It is, our lands are like a house, and how we manage that's really important. And again, this is where title is unproven. And I think this is interesting because it really is the situation where the Crown owes a duty, a procedural duty, what they call consultation. And again, it's under the sections 35 of the Constitution Act. So we're in a situation whether it's proven title or unproven title, the Crown has to sit down with us. And again, it's litigation or negotiation. And quite honestly, the way this government works, and you saw it with the teachers, is they prefer litigation. They prefer to spend public monies, thousands of millions of dollars on litigation. Even if they're proven wrong, they'll continue to go down that road because they seem to have this mentality that when they're in power, that the law is mightier than the public opinion. And so I'm really thinking that litigation is where we need to go with title in this British Columbia. And that's it. I just want to close by saying that we're in a time right now, not only sort of for our people, but British Columbia and Canada as a whole and the world, where if you think about what's going on at the Mount Poly and what happened with that disaster there, the interesting part is we can chase them out of Secwepemc, but you know what they're going to do? They're going to go to South America. And they're going to go down there and they're going to implant and embed themselves in a place where there is no law, no regulation, and they'll kill the Indian people to extract that gold. That's what they're going to do. So we have to think about this in this context. It's not about British Columbia and Canada in terms of the resource extraction. It's a world issue. So how do we begin to look at that? So we chase them out of British Columbia, fine, but they'll go someplace else and do it to some other indigenous people in the world. And I don't think that's a good thing. So we have to begin to think collectively about how do we collectively move forward on this sustainability in terms of the environment, but also sustainability as a people and our relationships with each other. So again, thank you. Kukshem.